Now this group is comprised of people called as electors. Now each state in America, there are 50 states, has its own set of electors tied to the popular vote within its borders. And the process of choosing electors is what converts individual choices into a collective decision. So how do states allocate their electors and what is the magic number needed here? Now this simple formula which is tied to the size of their congressional delegation. So under the Electoral College, all 50 states and the District of Columbia get electoral votes which is equal to their 2 senators and their number of representatives. For example, Georgia as a state has 2 senators and 14 representatives. So this means the state will have 16 electors. And since representatives are based on the size of the population, the smaller states like Alaska and Wyoming get about 3 each, while giants like California has 54 and Texas has 40 electoral votes. Now these numbers are dynamic. They keep shifting every 10 years with the census that realigns congressional seats based on the population changes. And the most recent census was conducted in the year 2020, which altered the electoral map, affecting how much power is distributed among the states. Meanwhile, Washington District, despite its lack of congressional representation, secures about 3 electoral votes thanks to the 23rd Amendment. So now each of the electoral represents about 1 electoral vote, and these electors vote according to who wins the popular vote in the state. For example, almost all US states follow winner-takes-all system, and where the candidate who gets the most votes from the public wins the support of the electors of the state. For example, if a state decides to vote red, then all the votes of the electors would go to Donald Trump. And in total, there are about 538 electoral votes in play, and the magic number is 270 here. This means candidates need a majority of 270 to become the 47th President of the United States. Now, if no candidate receives a majority of the votes, then the House of Representatives elects the President. And this process culminates in Electoral College meeting, which is to be held on December 17th. So after 5th November, the other important date is December 17th. Now, during this meeting, the electors gather in their state capitals to cast their votes for president along with vice president. And this meeting, which is enshrined in the US Constitution, finally sets the stage for the official count on January 6, 2025 in the House of Representatives. Another important date for you, January 6th. And with the new Congress looking on, these votes will solidify the outcome of this election. And just like that, the next president will be inaugurated on January 28, 2025. So this is the timeline of this election from November 5th to January 28th, which is when the election will conclude. Now, for presidential hopefuls, of course, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, the race is not just about winning hearts and minds. It's also about mapping out a path through the states. Candidates must strategically combine states so they can count on with battlegrounds that hold the key to their electoral success this time. Now, with this race becoming such a neck-to-neck battle, it is only the swing states that will decide who becomes the next president. So the journey to the White House, of course, is a complex puzzle where every vote counts and stakes could not be higher this time.
Now, like Ishita mentioned, if neither of the candidates is able to secure the 270 magic figure, then what really happens? It is a neck-and-neck fight. It is going to be a historical situation if such a case arises. Rohit Sharma will explain to you what happens in such a scenario.
The American election is so close that we do not know what will happen, who's going to win this election. But what is absolutely known is the fact that one of the candidates will be taking oath right here on the Capitol Hill, which is behind me. And as you can see, it's all lit up in all its glory. But there is also a chance, a very outside chance, that this election could be tied. And when I say it could be tied, it could mean that both candidates don't get to 270 electoral college votes. Both can end up getting 269 and 269, which would mean that there has to be a tiebreaker vote. And who's going to cast this tiebreaker vote? Well, the American Constitution has an amendment in place for scenarios like this, for an outlier election like this, where if both candidates end up with 269 electoral college votes, it's the House of Representatives and the Senate that decide who becomes its next president. And in the amendment, it is clearly written that the House of Representatives, which is the lower house, they will elect or select the next president of the United States, while the Senate will have say over who becomes its next vice president. Now, this is why the down ballot rates in America are also very important in this election cycle. From the polling, it seems like Democrats have an advantage in the House of Representative races, so they might be able to come and win a majority in the House of Representative, meaning they could very well end up electing a Democrat as the next president of the United States. However, in the Senate, it looks like the Republicans will have a majority. And obviously, for obvious reasons, they will choose a Republican as the next vice president of the United States. And it's never happened in the history of America where there has been a tie and then it had to be broken. But if there was a possibility in modern politics of that happening, that could very well happen in this very election.
That's all in this edition of Elections Unlocked US Special. But before I go, I'll leave you with this story of a social media sensation that has captured America's attention. Peanut, the squirrel, was rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo, was later euthanized by the New York authorities after having tested positive for rabies. He has created a sensation and outrage in the city and has become a talking point this election. Take a look at this report.
A social media sensation, Peanut the squirrel, has shaken up American politics days before crucial elections. Peanut was rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo and lived with him for 7 years. On Saturday, Longo was raided and Peanut taken away by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Health Department. Peanut was later euthanized to test for rabies.
It not only tears my family apart, but Peanut was the cornerstone of our nonprofit animal rescue. And 10 to 12 DEC officers raided my house as if I was a drug dealer. I was sat outside my house for 5 hours. I had to get a police escort to my bathroom. I wasn't even allowed to feed my rescue horses breakfast or lunch. I was sat there like a criminal.
A raccoon, also in Longo's care, was also taken away and euthanized to test for rabies. The viral squirrel's euthanasia triggered massive outrage online. With number of Trump supporters criticizing the Democrat government, the controversy was amplified by Donald Trump's top backer, Tesla CEO Elon Musk. American state law requires people to get a license if they wish to own a wild animal. Longo says he was working to get Peanut the required certification. Peanut amassed hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok. But at the peak of American elections, its death would be its most viral moment. Bureau Report, India Today.
At this moment, attention squarely focused on who's likely to win the presidential elections in the United States. If you think Maharashtra and Jharkhand are tight elections, don't know, can't say, too close to call, well, the United States is a whole different ballgame. And to talk about this, we're joined on this broadcast by Ishan Tharoor. He's a well-known columnist at the Washington Post. I have Pramit Pal Chowdhury, head of the India practice at Eurasia Group. And we have Arun Kumar Singh, who's been India's ambassador to the United States and is a non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie, India. I want to go across to Ishan first. Ishan, very rarely have pollsters and pundits been quite as confused. Are they just hedging their bets and therefore not giving clear answers? All these battleground states actually likely to go down to the wire in the way that these polls are suggesting?
Look, the polls have been suggesting for a very, very long time that it's a dead heat, and it is a dead heat. So, I mean, there's, on a certain level, they're right. Of course, there are lots of different models, lots of different polls, and lots of different polls that say certain things, point to different trends happening that could tilt one way or the other. We're talking about an election where the difference will be such a narrow margin of votes that it's, of course, quite difficult to really know come Tuesday night, and probably not just Tuesday night, come Wednesday morning, perhaps even Thursday morning, what some of the results may be. And so we're in a situation now where, yes, because of the particular anachronism of the American system, it comes down to a handful of certain states that are really up in the air. And both campaigns think they're making a strong last push and hoping to consolidate some gains.
A lot of what you do, Pramit Pal, at the Eurasia Group is risk advisory. What is the Eurasia Group advising its clients in terms of who do you think is more likely to win at this moment? 46, 48, 49, 50. It's looking really, really tight. Is that how tight it's going to be? Or do you think everyone's just hedging because they can't be quite sure?
Well, I think they can't be quite sure. I think my companies, from what I remember of our American team, continues to believe Trump has an edge. But it's really down to, I think, one of the calculations, as little as 80,000 voters will make the decision. That's not a surprise. Biden defeated Trump with only about, I think, 45,000 votes made the decision for him, gave him the Electoral College. This time it'll go down to almost the same number. Once you're down to such tiny numbers, the polling is almost incapable of actually predicting anything. And on top of that, polling in America now is as bad as polling in India. It has repeatedly gotten elections, got the last two presidential elections wrong. It's been incredibly poor in measuring, should we say, the degree of, in the last two elections, of Trump support. It grossly underestimated it. And then in the midterms, it swung in the other direction and overestimated Republican support. So if you look at a graph, there's a recent graph that came out by a group of pollsters who looked at it and said the degree of error now in U.S. polling is at a record high. America just can't work out what its own voters want to do.
It's not just America. Haryana shows us that that's the case in India as well, but that's a whole different conversation for another day. Ambassador Singh, you've seen American politics at close quarters during your time there. Looked at from the outside, this Trump campaign looks more organized than the 2016 campaign for sure, arguably more organized than 2020 as well. Your sense of who carries the momentum in the final stages?
So I had watched closely the elections in 2008, 12, 16, 20, and of course now the current one. And you're right that this time perhaps the Trump campaign is more organized, although Trump continues to be unpredictable, unpredictable in many ways. But I still think it's difficult to say who carries the momentum. Now, if you recall 2016, it was only after midnight that the Clinton campaign finally conceded that she might be losing and then came back to concede only the next day. And in the 2020 campaign, Biden came on stage late at night and said, although the trends seem to be against us, we are likely to win. So just hang on there. So I think, as you said, there was a sense that immediately after Kamala Harris' nomination came through, she had the edge. After a while, Trump was catching on. But of late, she's again got the momentum. So I think on balance, one should just say it's difficult to predict. And I think from India's point of view, it doesn't matter who wins.
Ishan, let's build on that. Does it matter to India who wins? To some extent, in some ways, it does, because Trump comes in. If he increases tariffs, that impacts India. He's also more mercurial and transactional. On the other hand, Kamala Harris as president could potentially want to create more troubles for Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government in a lot of things that someone like Donald Trump won't care very much about.
I think the ambassador is right. There's been all signs from the Biden administration that India is a priority for the United States. They see India as a strategic partner in the future, and they wouldn't want to rock the boat. The wild card, as you said, is Trump's economic plans, his vision for really disrupting global trade and slapping tariffs on virtually everything. And then, of course, Trump's approach to foreign policy in general is so based on his kind of sense of bilateral deal-making, his transactionalism, that there could be moments where India could be surprised by certain deals that Trump makes, Trump wants to make with India or wants to make with other countries as well. So I think in terms of continuity and reliability, there's a safer bet with the Harris administration. I think, before we even talk about the foreign policy implications, the other thing to really know about and recognize is that if Trump loses, he is not going to accept it. He has made it very abundantly clear that defeat is not something he's going to accept. He doesn't still accept his defeat in 2020, and the entire ecosystem around him has already started to lay the ground with conspiracy theories about the scams and steal happening right now. So we're heading for a pretty volatile moment in the event that Kamala Harris does win.
Pramit Pal, does it matter from India's perspective who wins? I get the sense by talking to many in government that they believe that Donald Trump might be easier to deal with. They also have a good rapport, the Prime Minister and Donald Trump. Will that make a difference, or do you think that Kamala Harris too is just likely to carry on in the same spirit as Joe Biden?
Well, I think the core relationship will remain exactly the same. The core of China, technology, though the Indo-Pacific, all of that will remain, has been constant with both the Biden administration and with the Trump administration in the past. If you look at the foreign policy teams on either side, we saw our foreign minister met Philip Gordon, who's likely to be the national security advisor of Kamala Harris recently, and didn't seem to have any problems at that meeting, or was reassured that there would be continuity. And I gather some members of the Biden team, including, let's say, CIA Director Bill Burns, would probably continue in a Harris administration. So the continuity is strong. But there will be, yes, areas on the margins in which they will differ. Kamala Harris is a legal person. She tends to be much more focused she seems to be more legalistic, if you wish, in her thinking. So issues like civil rights, the Panun case that's there between India and US will probably become a bit more difficult under her. On the other hand, with Trump, one area which Prime Minister Modi takes very seriously, finance, green finance and climate generally, will almost disappear off the government-to-government agenda because his administration, or he doesn't take that seriously. So, but those are fringe issues. The broad strategic relationship will remain, I think, completely solid, and I don't think that will change at all.
Ambassador Arun Singh, is it correct that the MEA would find it easier to work with a Trump administration? Does Kamala Harris, as president, and her administration pose a greater headache for India on issues like Khalistani terrorists being supported by countries like the US and Canada? Is there likely to be more prickliness with Kamala Harris than with Donald Trump?
So I can't speak for the MEA or the government. I've been away from the government for more than 8 years. But based on my understanding of the situation and my understanding of how both Republican and Democratic administrations have handled India over the last couple of decades, including the Obama-Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, and the Trump administration, I think we should be broadly okay. There is, in some quarters, sometimes a perception that Trump is easier to handle. But if you go back and recall the Trump presidency, he was very, very unpredictable. He criticized India several times for what he said were high tariffs in India. He ridiculed the Indian leaders. He imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from India, ostensibly on national security grounds, which you can't explain if India is a strategic partner. He removed generalized scheme of preferences, under which many Indian products had duty-free access in the US market. And then you recall that in 2019, he invited Imran Khan to the White House when he wanted Pakistan to pressurize Taliban into getting into an agreement with the US. And in that White House meeting, he said that he was ready to mediate on Kashmir, and that the Indian Prime Minister had asked him to mediate on Kashmir, which was simply not true. And the Indian Foreign Minister had to, a couple of days later, say in Parliament that there's no truth to what the President had said. And also in the Trump administration, both governments had tried to do a limited trade agreement. And they discussed that for 2 years, and they couldn't even succeed in getting that. So, the Trump administration will have broadly a positive approach, as we saw with the Indo-Pacific strategy, the starting of the Quad meetings. Similarly, in the Biden-Harris administration, we saw the Quad being elevated to summit-level meetings, and this whole new initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which has really deepened the technology partnership between India and the US. The authorization for General Electric to transfer 80% of technology for the F414 engines, or the authorization for the armed drones to be supplied to India. So these are the things that happened during the Biden-Harris presidency. So I think in the broad strategic convergence that is there, we should be okay with either winning the election. There will be different sets of challenges with the two, and we have to find a way to handle and manage those differences.
Ishan, how is Trump of circa 2024 looking different from what we saw between 2016 and 2020?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that he's older, exhibiting more signs of that age, and there are mounting concerns about his actual acuity and fitness in certain moments. He's had some quite worrying public displays. He is an angrier Trump. He is operating on a lot of grievance. Much of it is personal because of the mounting legal cases that he's faced and that he will be able to evade if he wins the presidency. But then there's also, he is channeling a right-wing nationalist movement that operates on grievance and anger, that is inflamed about various issues, most especially immigration, which may also have interesting wrinkles for the Indian-US relationship. And he's somebody who has really, his pitch to his base has been, this is going to be an all gloves off presidency. I'm not going to take any prisoners here. I will be your vengeance. And he's promised all sorts of astonishing executive acts. Some of them he may not be able to actually accomplish. But he's really going to take the US into an interesting chapter of its democracy if he wins.
Why has the Kamala Harris campaign, Ishan, according to you, failed to take off? When she came in soon after President Biden announced that he was stepping aside, the gap in the polls was much more. From there on, her campaign seems to have faltered to some extent and not really taken off, leading to someone like Barack Obama having to tell black American men not to vote for Donald Trump and instead stick with Team Harris.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's failed to take off. I think, yes, she came in quite late. The circumstances in which she entered were quite extraordinary, but we're seeing a campaign that is trying to build this sort of supposed big tent coalition. She's trying to appeal to centrists, appeal to moderate Republicans who can't really stomach Trump, as opposed to really turning the way Trump does towards the Democratic base, which in many cases are people of color, young people, poorer people perhaps in the cities. She's not making that pitch. She's making the pitch of the centrist establishment, which was the exact same pitch that Hillary Clinton made in 2016. But I think the Kamala campaign is also very mindful of what went wrong in 2016, and they believe that they've cobbled together the kind of votes and the kind of message that will make the difference in these pivotal swing states. And they're doing quite well, perhaps even better than Biden did in 2020 with white college-educated voters. And this is the curious thing. And you're seeing, of course, the Democrats will always win a majority of women, a majority of people of color. But yes, you are seeing on the margins, men especially, and men of color especially, indicating that they are more likely now than before to consider Trump and the Republicans.
Well, before we get to Maharashtra and Jharkhand, there is the results in the United States to deal with. We keep going back to Ishan Tharoor, Pramit Pal and Arun Kumar Singh. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on the build-up to the final climax in the US presidential elections. Thank you.
Thank you.
While most opinion polls in the United States show a dead heat between Trump and Harris, the state of Iowa, a deeply red state, has sprung a last-minute surprise. Kamala Harris has taken a surprising lead in a voter survey over Trump in the state that last voted for a Democrat candidate in 2012.
Chest thumping, beating trumpets. Both candidates for the US presidential election tried to ensure that their voters remain confident before the 5th November vote.
But all I can say is on Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out, and it's going to be party time. It's going to be party time. And this is really all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and I'll fix it, and we'll do it very quickly.
So, Michigan, 2 days to go. In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it? And we have the momentum because our campaign is tapping into the ambitions, the aspirations, and the dreams of the American people. Because we are optimistic and excited about what we can do together.
One thing is for sure, that this was a very colorful election campaign, and both candidates have been neck and neck throughout. Posters are busy predicting the front runner. Atlas Inter's latest poll shows former President Donald Trump leading the predictions, especially in all 7 swing states. About 49% of the respondents said they would vote for Donald Trump in the upcoming presidential election, as the Republicans hold a 1.8% vote lead over his counterpart, Democrat Kamala Harris. The survey conducted on the first 2 days of November included nearly 2,500 likely voters in the US, the majority of which were female. A Reuters Ipsos poll published last week on 29 October showed Kamala Harris lead over Donald Trump, with the Democrat ahead by few percentage points over the Republican, 49% to 46%. The American website 538 of ABC focuses on opinion poll analysis. In their latest release, Harris had a small lead over Trump in the national polling averages, 48% to 47%.
Making Donald Trump one of the biggest losers.
The current Vice President Kamala Harris has led Trump in every Reuters, Ipsos and ABC 538 poll of registered voters since she entered the race in July and built a lead of nearly 4 percentage points towards the end of August. The polls were relatively stable in September and early October, but they have tightened in the last couple of weeks, with her lead steadily shrinking since late September. While national polls are a useful guide as to how popular a candidate is across the whole country, they are not the best way to predict the US presidential election result. Bureau Report, India Today.
Kamala, you're fired. Get out of here.
I want to go across to our correspondents joining us from the United States. Geeta Mohan, our Foreign Affairs Editor, joins us from New York. We've got Rohit Sharma joining us from Washington, D.C. It's politically hot, but the weather seems a lot colder than it is in India at this moment. Geeta, you've seen many an Indian election and some American elections as well. How does this differ from everything we get to see back home?
Well, in terms of the scale, in terms of how the approaches, the media strategy, the election strategy, very, very different. What's on the agenda, what really matters, and how things make a difference over here as opposed to India. The election system itself is very different. So yes, it is rather confusing for people who are watching back home as to how is it that one person gets an entire state rather than getting the electoral numbers, as is the case in India. So interesting, Rahul, interesting play over here when it comes to elections. But there are 7 battleground states this time around. They normally differ from 6, 7 to 8. This time around there are 7. And Pennsylvania is going to be a very, very important one at that. Whether if Trump is going to get a hold of Pennsylvania or not is the big question. I'm in New York, and interestingly, New York has always been quite polarized since Trump stepped in. This time around as well, we have some Kamala Harris supporters here, but you have to come on the ground to see how many of them are actually coming out and supporting Donald Trump. You'd be surprised. There are people who are Hispanics, minorities, South Asians, Indian community I've been speaking with, all of them, Rahul, over here are coming out and saying that they prefer Trump to Kamala Harris. Might be different in different states, might be different in the battleground states, but in New York, it does seem like Republicans and Trump does have an upper hand, an edge over Kamala Harris.
Okay, Rohit, you've been covering this election very closely. Who do you think is ending this contest stronger? It seemed for a while that Kamala Harris was in the lead. Then it seemed Trump had edged past her in the battleground states. Now, a lot of the US polls seem to suggest that Harris has picked up some momentum right towards the end of the campaign.
So, I mean, it is very interesting, Rahul. You know, we've seen a lot of US elections over the years. Nothing, you know, the only thing that comes this close is the election of 2000, which is Bush versus Gore, and all came down to one state of Florida. And I think this time around, as Geeta was saying, it is the state of Pennsylvania. I spoke to somebody who's on the ground in Pennsylvania, somebody on Kamala Harris's campaign, and they texted me back saying it's anxious energy. They're getting flashbacks of 2016 where they thought they had it in the bag, but anything can happen. And I think most likely, Rahul, I think it's going to come down to voters who are going to be showing up to polling booths tomorrow. A lot of people have voted early. About 70 million people have used mail-in ballots and turned to election centers to vote. But can Kamala Harris and her campaign make sure that voters who haven't voted in these battleground states show up to polls tomorrow? I think that will decide who gets to win all these important battleground states. Also, the fact that, you know, everybody has been on the ground in Pennsylvania from both the campaigns. We're seeing Kamala Harris. She's going to be in Pennsylvania today. She's going to visit the three towns, Pittsburgh, Allentown, and the Bucks County, I think, if I remember correctly. She's going to be in these three counties and you know, suburban areas today to, again, in Pennsylvania, make her case so that voters show up in these suburban states, while Trump is going to North Carolina, he's going to Michigan, and he's also going to go to Pennsylvania. So very, very close, very tight race. I think it's going to go down the wire. And remember, during 2016, Trump only won Pennsylvania by a fraction of a point. And in 2020, Joe Biden only won by 1 point. So whoever gets to win Pennsylvania probably would have their neck ahead. Very close, we can't tell. And I've talked to a lot of people on the ground. It seems like right now it's really dead heat for both the candidates.
Rohit Sharma and Geeta Mohan, thank you for joining us. We'll keep tracking your updates all through this week on India Today. Election fraud versus democracy in danger. Abortion ban versus reproductive rights. A convicted felon versus a criminal prosecutor. America will choose between two starkly different candidates. Here's how Harris and Trump have squared off on key issues.
How do you like my garbage truck? This truck is in honor of Kamala and Joe Biden. And I just wanted to let you know that 250 million people, that's what I think the real number is for making America great again. 250 million, the real number. They don't think in terms of garbage, okay? They don't use terms like that, and it's a shame.
Over the last 8 years, Donald Trump has become more confused, more unstable, and more angry. And it is clear he has become increasingly unhinged. But the last time, at least there were people who could control him. But notice, they're not with him this time.
Kamala's gross incompetence disqualifies her from being President of the United States of America. She is grossly incompetent. All you have to do is look at her interviews, look at what she did the other night on fake news, CNN. Just take a look. She couldn't answer a question. She's unfit for office. Everyone knows it. No one respects her. No one trusts her. No one takes her seriously. Everyone knows she is a very low IQ individual.
My economic plan actually will strengthen America's economy. They've reviewed Donald Trump's plan and have determined he will weaken America's economy, he will ignite inflation, and he will bring on a recession by the middle of next year.
The bond between the United States and Israel is strong and enduring, and if and when they say, when I'm president, I don't say that, I never say that, if and when, I'm President of the United States. It will once again be stronger and closer than it ever was before. We have to win this election. If we don't win this election, there's tremendous consequence for everything. November 5th will be the most important day in the history of our country. I think it will also be the most important day in the history of Israel, if you want to know the truth. I believe that. I think you believe that, too.
As president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza. To bring home the hostages, end the suffering in Gaza, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination.
But I've come today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote, this election, most important election you've ever even thought about voting in, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals pouring into our country, and I will bring back the American dream.
We have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is, but Madison, that is not who we are.
Do you like it better now or 4 years ago? Well, I ask it a different. Do you like it better now or 4 years ago? And I've come today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote on Tuesday, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of massive numbers of criminals coming into our country. Thank you very much, Kamala and Joe. And I will bring back the American dream, and we'll bring it back stronger than ever before. But this is all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and we will fix it, and we're going to fix it fast.
Just imagine on January 20th. Because if he is elected, if Donald Trump is elected, he's going to be sitting in that Oval Office stewing over his enemies list. Because he spends full time plotting revenge and retribution. So imagine on January 20th, it's either that, him plotting over his enemies list, or me working for you on my to-do list.
It's being called the Armageddon election. On the eve of polling, both contenders Trump and Harris focused on the big prize of Pennsylvania, the largest of the 7 swing states expected to decide the American presidential elections. Opinion polls showed Donald Trump and Kamala Harris locked in a tight race. It's going down to the wire.
We just endorsed it.
It's a tight fight to the finish. In less than 48 hours, America decides its next president. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris pushed their closing messages to voters on the last day of campaigning. Republican Donald Trump made a last pitch for support in Pennsylvania, the largest of the 7 states expected to decide the presidential election. Trump repeatedly criticized the U.S. election process.
They are fighting so hard to steal this damn thing. Look at what's going on. Look at what's going on in your state. Every day, they're talking about extending hours and stuff. Who ever heard of this stuff? We should have one-day voting and paper ballots. It's a damn shame. And I'm the only one that talks about it because everyone's afraid to damn talk about it. And then they accuse you of being a conspiracy theorist. These are conspiracy, and they want to lock you up. They want to put you in jail. The ones that should be locked up are the ones that cheat on these horrible elections that we go through in our country. And I don't know what's going to happen, but for future elections, I won't be even a part of it. But you ought to damn well go to paper ballots. You ought to go to voter ID. And you ought to have the election over by 9 o'clock. I'm hearing now they're going to take weeks. Can you imagine? They spend all this money on machines. and they're going to say, we may take an extra 12 days to determine. And what do you think happens during that 12 days? What do you think happens? These elections have to be decided by 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock on Tuesday night. Bunch of crooked people. These are crooked people.
Trump, who continues to falsely claim that his 2020 loss to Democratic President Joe Biden was the result of widespread fraud, insists that he is winning.
Our country is a crooked country, okay? It's a crooked country, and we're going to make it straight. We're going to make it straight, and it's not an easy thing to do.
Opinion polls show Donald Trump and Kamala Harris locked in a tight race, with Harris bolstered by strong support among women voters, while Trump gains ground with Hispanic voters, particularly men. Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris made her closing pitch at a rally in East Lansing, Michigan. Harris addressed Michigan's 200,000 Arab Americans, starting her speech with a nod to civilian victims of Israel's conflict with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
This year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza, and given the civilian casualties and displacement in Lebanon. It is devastating. And as president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza. To bring home the hostages, end the suffering in Gaza, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination. Are we ready to fight for it?
Harris did not mention Trump's name during the 25-minute speech, only referring to certain individuals.
I believe health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. And to those certain individuals who still want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and take us back to the days when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions, well, you all know what we say. We are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back.
America's moment of reckoning is here. Bureau Report, India Today.
So what's at stake for the rest of the world? We've spoken about the nuances of American politics, but a lot rests for geopolitics basis what happens this week in the United States. And to talk about that, we're joined by Gideon Rahman, one of the world's most widely followed foreign affairs commentators. Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman, for joining us.
Pleasure.
How do you see the outcome of this presidential election shaping the hot-button issues of geopolitics at a macro level? I'll get into issue by issue in just a moment, but broadly, in terms of the direction global politics takes at this moment, how does this verdict impact that?
I think it's, for once, actually, the choice is pretty stark. I mean, there are always elements, strong elements of continuity in American foreign policy, Republican or Democrat, but some of the things that Trump wants to do would be quite a radical break. So the first is obviously sharply increasing tariffs. He's talked about a 60% tariff on Chinese goods, which would be a kind of bomb under the world economy because US-China is the largest trading relationship in the world, 10 to 20% on everyone else. That would really mean that America is a deeply protectionist country, and because it's the world's largest market for many goods, it would be a kind of radical reshaping of world trade. I think in terms of war and peace, Trump has said repeatedly that he would create peace in Ukraine in one day. Now, there's an element of hyperbole there, but I think the way that people read it is that he's saying there would be no more big Western aid packages for Ukraine, that Ukraine would be forced to come to the table. Whether Putin would come to the table is, I think, an interesting question. He might feel the war's going sufficiently well that he'll keep going. But Trump would clearly want to end the war, and I think probably also try to rebuild relations with Russia. I think as far as India is concerned, both sides will continue to press for a very close US-Indian relationship. China, it's a bit ambiguous. But I think that the tariff thing would be huge for China.
Will Mr. Trump, if he wins, be able to implement the most radical parts of his campaign agenda? Many of his supporters argue that some of this is just said on the campaign trail. And if you see his actual record from 2016 to 2020, while he said a lot, he didn't necessarily go out and do many of those things.
Well, that's, a fair point. I think that there are 2 points there, really. The first is what's rhetoric and what is he's really intending to do. And the second is what stuff does he need to get through Congress and what doesn't he? But my sense is that there's at least, 50-50 chance that Trump, a second Trump, would pursue some of his more radical ideas, because I think in the first term he was constrained by the fact that he appointed relatively conventional foreign policy advisors, people like H.R. McMaster, Rex Tillerson, who were very establishment Republicans. And many of those people have now bitterly denounced him and said they're not going to vote for him. John Bolton, John Kelly, his former chief of staff, has called him a fascist. So I think Trump is going to be surrounded by people who are much purer Trumpists, if you like, and more willing to really go for his agenda, including a man of Indian origin who you may have heard of, called Kash Patel, who is an important Trump advisor and regarded with some fear by Democrats because I think he's somebody they think is very on board for purging the deep state, as Trump would call it. So I think Trump would be a bit more radical, and the question is, does he run into problems? I think tariffs he probably will do, and I think he can do it without having to get congressional approval for particular rates. Other issues, would he pull out of NATO? John Bolton has said that he would. I'm a bit more skeptical about that because, this is an alliance of, over 30 countries where America is the dominant force. So it's a great American diplomatic asset. I'm not sure he'd really pull out of NATO in the long run, but I think he might undermine the NATO security guarantee, the idea that America would automatically fight if a NATO country was attacked. And in the context of Russia potentially winning the war in Ukraine, that would be really quite significant.
Let's spend a moment on China. Looked at from the perspective of trying to halt China's march towards wanting to become a global superpower, do these tariffs help push back China's march?
Well, they certainly wouldn't be welcomed in China. At a time when the Chinese economy is struggling really for the first time in 30 years, their growth is slowing and they don't seem to have an obvious answer. It's a big blow to them. I think the thing that you would always have to worry about, though, is, and it's true of almost any other economic sanction, is might you kind of deliver a blow in the short run, but make the problem worse in the long run? That, for example, if America started trying to force other countries to choose between American markets and Chinese markets, might quite a lot of them say, well, we're going with China, because China offers cheap EVs, cheap 5G. America doesn't really have a viable counteroffer. So some of it could backfire. I also think that, it kind of depends what you think is driving China, but if there's any debate in China about whether America is a dangerous adversary or not, and if there's still a school of people in China that want to manage the relationship and kind of get on with America, then sort of punching them in the face with tariffs probably sort of finishes off the internationalist school in China. So could arguably make China a more dangerous adversary over the long run. But it would be damaging to their economy. But whether it would, say, deflect them, end them as a military power, I really don't think so. There's been a formidable military build-up over the last 30 years. So the danger is that you might have a China that feels very angry but has a massive military and still has its ambitions to displace the United States in Asia, it could become quite dangerous.
Is Donald Trump likely to be better than Kamala Harris from India's perspective? Is he going to be easier to deal with for Prime Minister Modi and the government?
I think, in some respects, it depends what you mean by better, but I think that, certainly I was in Delhi a couple of weeks ago, and it struck me that, you'll know this better than me, Rahul, but my sense was that, certainly on the right in India, there's a feeling that the Republicans are less likely to give India a hard time on human rights, and particularly with this ongoing rumbling investigation into the alleged assassination plot on American soil, that the Democrats might be more legalistic, tougher on that, whereas Trump is more of a kind of deal maker and might say, well, you know what, the relationship's more important than that, I don't care. So I think there are quite strong sort of people-to-people relationships between the BJP and the Republicans, and possibly between Modi and Trump. That said, I mean, if you look at the last 4 years of US-Indian relations, it's hard to argue that the Biden administration, until this latest, argument about Mr. Panun came up, has been anything other than positive on its relations with India. I think any US government is going to see India as critical to their goal of containing Chinese power. And the US and India signed, I think in June, a very important deal on technology sharing. Now, that happened under Biden, and I think would continue to happen under Harris. I see you're asking, is Kamala losing the Indian vote? I don't know. I mean, I think that's another fascinating wrinkle. I mean, if Harris wins, and she has, her mother was Indian, very strong, spent a lot of her childhood visiting India. It's a country that, unlike almost any other American president, she knows well. But how that would affect her dealings specifically with a BJP government, I just don't know.
Kamala Harris seems more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause than Donald Trump. How do either of these choices impact the war in the Middle East?
Look, I think she is. Hard to be less sympathetic than Trump, but and I think she's more sympathetic than Biden, actually. But I think that any US president, there's a pretty narrow range in which they're going to move on that issue. I think she might try to be a bit tougher towards Netanyahu. There's no love lost there. And you could look at things like possibly restricting some arms sales, possibly even singling out one or two of the really far-right ministers in the Israeli government and, sanctioning them or something like that. I don't think that's beyond the bounds of possibility. But on the other hand, I don't think that there would be any question of putting Israel's security at risk. So even as they got tough with the Israelis over, indiscriminate killing in Gaza or what's happening on the West Bank, there would be a kind of ironclad commitment to defending Israel from missile attacks from Iran. So that would remain. And I also think that American domestic politics mean that there's always going to be a limit to how tough the US is going to get with Israel. It's a sort of matter of nuance rather than a complete rupture with previous policies.
How does the rest of the world react, and what can they possibly do if Donald Trump refuses to accept the verdict, especially if he's lost the election?
I don't know what the rest of the world just sort of sit there with their head in their hands watching. There's not much we can do. But I do think it's very damaging for America's kind of image of stability, because a lot of America's soft power, if you like, and authority in the world came from its argument that it had this political system that certainly for most of my life, most of the world looked to with admiration, because it delivered both sort of stability but liberty. And it seemed to show that you could have both at the same time, so that America could go through wrenching experiences like Watergate, the impeachment of a president, that a president was held up, accountable under the law, left power. That was Nixon in the 70s. That you had, the peaceful transfer of power was never under question in the United States, and now it is. And so that is a huge shock to Americans, but a huge shock to the world. And to the extent that part of what America says to the world is, look, our system works, it can be a model for you, don't go the Russia-China route. If America appears to be falling apart politically, that's very damaging. But also, I think it may kind of cause a sort of paralysis in American foreign policy. And I mean, I often think of the way that Putin thinks about the world, and I think Putin regards the sort of collapse of 89, 91 in Russia, eventually leading to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, as a sort of, as he said, a geopolitical tragedy, but one that stemmed from a crisis in the Russian political order. And I think he must be looking at Washington and thinking, maybe it's your turn now. Your system's about to collapse. And what would be the implications for American power around the world? We saw that Soviet power around the world crumbled when their domestic political order crumbled. Might the same thing happen to the United States? I would think Putin would certainly be hoping so.
Putin and Xi Jinping would quite like that. A lot at stake very clearly on what happens in the United States. Gideon Rahman for joining us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Let's raise all the big questions. Who is winning this race for America? Is Donald Trump now set for a major comeback? Could Kamala Harris still create history? Will the gender gap become a huge question? The fact that more women could vote for Kamala Harris? Or is America First slogan the key factor for Donald Trump? Let's go to our guest straight away. I'm joined by Sri Thanedar, U.S. Congressman and a Democrat from Detroit. Edward Luce, U.S. National Editor, Financial Times, Washington, joining me. Daniel Block is Senior Editor at Foreign Affairs magazine and contributing editor of the Washington Monthly. I appreciate all of you joining us on the show today. Let's come to you first to get a democratic perspective, if I may, Sri Thanedar. The general belief is that as things stand, Donald Trump could well be edging ahead in this last stretch. Is there a sense that Kamala Harris is now going to have to pull off a bit of a rabbit out of the hat in the last 24 hours?
Not really, Rajdev. Thanks again for having me. But, Kamala Harris is certainly ahead in the national polls. But more importantly, she needs to win the 270 votes in the Electoral College and the critical state. So I'm sitting here in Michigan. Yesterday, Kamala had a wonderful rally. She is closing the gap very quickly. The gender gap, women are in favor of her in large numbers. There are some women who would not want to tell their husbands they're voting for Kamala Harris, but they are supporting Kamala Harris because of she protects the women's rights, women's right to choose. She's for the economy. There's a perception that economy is better under Trump, but that's never true. The stock market has always done better under Democratic administrations. So I am sitting here in Michigan looking, things are tilting. The key swing states are tilting more in favor of Kamala Harris, while Trump is trying to defend North Carolina, which he won. And he's now, Iowa numbers are coming out in favor of Kamala Harris.
Let me turn to those Iowa numbers in a moment, because Ed Luce, there's a sense that in Iowa, for example, the pollsters seem to suggest the gender gap, women coming out strongly and voting for Kamala Harris is the belief. But you've got Donald Trump also doing strongly in many of the swing states like Arizona, possibly Nevada, and Georgia. So you've got a situation where it comes to the so-called blue wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. What's your sense? Is it now down to turnout? Or is there a sense that Donald Trump has tapped into a certain Americanism which might take him over the hump?
Yeah, look, Trump
he might.
is trying
just a minute. Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
He might. The thing is, the flap of a butterfly wing could change the outcome when it's this narrow. It's so narrow, and we're down to potentially a few thousand votes here and there in swing states. However sophisticated an opinion pollster is, they cannot tap into the minds of undecided voters who may yet still have not made their minds up. But broadly speaking, why Kamala Harris is doing well in a place like Iowa, which is very white, by the way, is because Iowa has banned abortion. And so there's a real reaction from women there. And they're conservative women, generally speaking. Iowa is a red state nowadays. But as Liz Cheney, the former Republican congresswoman, said to them when she endorsed Kamala Harris, vote your conscience and nobody need ever know which way you voted. So I think there's going to be a lot of women coming out. This is a gender election, more than any others, even than the Hillary-Trump election of 2016. But then on the other side of things, why you see Trump ahead perhaps in Arizona is it's a border state. And a lot of illegal immigration does come through Arizona. And so even though there is an abortion referendum on the ballot in Arizona as well, I think because it's a border state, that might outweigh it. But really, within the margin of error of these polls, Trump could sweep the Electoral College, all 7 swing states, and Kamala Harris could sweep all 7 swing states and therefore the Electoral College. Those scenarios are within the margin of error. So this is as close as I've ever seen. I'm probably up there with the Florida 2000 debacle recount, where we're really, really close.
Wow. Daniel Block, senior editor at Foreign Affairs magazine, what's that X factor that could break this seemingly dead heat? Or are pollsters just playing safe? There are some pollsters now even predicting a potential Trump landslide. But by and large, it appears a dead heat. So what's the X factor, Daniel, that can make the difference?
I think at this point, we really don't know. And I'm not sure that there's any new piece of news or information that could really change the election in any one huge way or another. Attitudes toward these candidates are pretty well baked in. Voters tend to know them both. They know Trump in particular quite well. I really want to echo what Ed said. It is an exceptionally close race. And the polls, we just don't know. There is a sense that the polls are engaging in what's called herding, where because they don't want to be seen as wildly off in one way or another, they are kind of channeling their results to show a really narrow toss-up.
Are they playing safe? Are they playing safe, Daniel? Other pollsters, once bitten, twice shy. I go back to the Hillary election 8 years ago when they obviously underpolled Trump. Are they just playing safe?
By and large, they appear to be playing safe. There are certainly exceptions. That Iowa poll by J.N. Selzer you cited, she is certainly not playing safe, showing a Harris lead there. But yes, they're by and large playing safe. The margins of error are very tight. So again, we could see anything. It's the closest election I've certainly seen. Harris could sweep all 7 states. Both outcomes are totally within the margin of error. If I were to bet right now, I would bet on a protracted, long election night, possibly another election week where we don't know who wins until later in the week. But they appear to be playing safe, and so we really don't know who's going to win.
Ed, your sense, though, that is it about who brings their voters to the polling booths? Given what happened in Pennsylvania both 4 years ago and 8 years ago, margins razor thin in that state, is it at the end of the day who comes out to vote? This U.S. election, more than any other in recent times, is about turnout, who gets their loyalists out there to the polling booths.
Yes, this is a ground game. The share of America that's undecided is minute by the share of previous elections. Like everybody's known, 90% of America, or maybe even more, 94% of America has been absolutely clear which way it's going to be voting for months, if not years. So the slither of this country that doesn't know, and goodness knows how, if you haven't made your mind up now, what's going to make it up for you. But it therefore turns this into a get your people out operation. And I'd have to say, I'd give a little bit more of the psychological and organizational edge there to the Harris campaign, because there are a lot more women who vote in general. And a lot more women than normal are now pro her because of the whole abortion rights issue. And women do tend to vote in higher numbers. A lot of the people saying they support Trump, including young African-American men and young men in general, are a little bit less good in following through on what they tell the pollsters. And I find it a little bit hard to believe that Republicans have a get out the vote operation that includes young African-American males. They've just never tried this before. There's no infrastructure, but these are straws in the wind. Let me just reiterate, it's 50-50.
It's 50-50. Sri Thanedar, the fact is the Democrats 3 months ago were being virtually written off Biden presidency. You bring in Kamala Harris, you catch up, get some momentum. but there's a feeling in the last couple of weeks that the Democrats perhaps pushed a few of the wrong buttons. Is there a feeling that perhaps this could be 2016 all over again, where Hillary was then the odds-on favorite but lost to Trump? This time, come from behind, Kamala is struggling. What is it about Donald Trump that makes him so difficult to defeat?
Well, he's playing on people's fears. But, you know, Kamala Harris is so different from Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton did not come into Michigan much. Kamala Harris, I have been with her 6 different rallies here in Michigan. She's not taking anything for granted. She's having 3, 4, 5 different rallies. She's traveling all over. So the gender, you know, women are
what's her
supporting
message? You see, her challenge, Shri, has been, has she given a clear enough message to get her people out? Yes, abortion rights is a big issue. Democracy khatre mein hai, or democracy is under threat, as she seems to suggest in America. But is that enough to bring people in when you've got Donald Trump on the other side, praying, as you said, to the fears and insecurities of many Americans?
राजदीप जी देखिए, ये 2 कैंडिडेट्स जो है बहुत अलग टाइप के लोग हैं. Donald Trump is so angry. He is, portraying all kinds of anger and hate. On the other hand, Kamala ji, she is very, very appealing. She's happy. She came on Saturday Night Live. She has a sense of humor. She's in great spirit, and has this positive message. So do you support this positive woman who has a positive message, or you go to that angry man who's trying to keep himself out of prison? So
Daniel Block, is Trump still playing on the fears of people? Ed mentioned the point about Arizona, the fear of immigrants under a Harris administration, or is it the economy stupid? The real issue at the end of the day is food on the table and jobs for people.
Continuing to prey on fears, whether that's enough in some ways to alienate certain voters, or if it turns on certain voters and gets them into his camp, we don't know. We'll find out. But I would cite the Madison Square Garden rally that happened relatively recently in New York City, where it was kind of a carnival of grievances, where you had people come out and make very racist jokes and talk about the country being under siege in various ways. And that could mobilize certain voters, but I think there's also some evidence that it really turns them off. So someone came out and referred to Puerto Rico as a, quote, floating island of garbage. Pennsylvania is a state with 500,000 Puerto Rican voters. And that was a comment that appeared to really break through. You had Puerto Rican superstars Bad Bunny endorsing Harris afterward. So the preying on fears could really work both ways. But again, it may ultimately be swamped by the economy, by high levels of inflation. I think one thing that's interesting is if you look at some of the swing states and you look at the polling, Trump is not surprisingly doing better in states that have had higher inflation over the last 4 years, like Arizona, like Nevada. So it could also be swing state by swing state, which of those 2 factors is going to matter more.
Ed, final word. The economy is stupid, as famously said by previous American presidents. Is it going to boil down to that? We can talk of abortion, we can talk of immigration, but at the end of the day, it's going to be, who do the people of America trust to handle the economy better over the next 4 years?
I mean, that would be the expectation. Voters keep saying it's their top concern and immigration second, and democracy doesn't come in the top 5. You or I might hope that it would, but it doesn't. And so therefore, Trump's closing argument should have borrowed from the Ronald Reagan famous line in 1980, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" But he keeps getting in the way of himself. Instead of sticking to the message discipline, his campaign's tearing its hair out, what hair they've got left, because he keeps pivoting to things like images of shooting Liz Cheney or defending comedians who call Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage, or whatever it is that he allows himself to get distracted by. He keeps getting in the way of his own message. All I would say is, if there were a normal, I know that's a loaded word, but if there were a sort of traditional Republican nominee now, that person would be winning quite clearly.
Interesting. Trump's unpredictability, both his strength and his weakness, and Kamala Harris is really seeking to create a slice of history by becoming the first woman president of the United States. Fascinating insights from all my guests. I appreciate you joining us. We have a few long nights ahead. India counts a bit better, I can tell you, than America. For all the criticism of our EVM machines, we tend to be faster, better at maths perhaps than the Americans, but we'd wait and see how that plays out. Ed Luce and my other guests, thank you all very much for joining me here on the News Today.
Only 24 hours to go for the big American election. The race to the White House is in its final lap. Both presidential hopefuls are rallying their bases with promises and bold visions for the future, even at this last stage. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are working tirelessly to energize their supporters because this is an election system that really goes down to the last lap. We've seen in the last couple of elections how things have been incredibly close. The candidates are painting contrasting pictures of the future, Trump focusing on economic revival and Kamala on humanitarian efforts. Recent polling indicates fluctuating leads depending on who you're watching in the United States, with Trump claiming a slight advantage in several swing states, while other surveys suggesting that Kamala has maintained a narrow national lead, making this one of the most exciting American elections in decades. Take a look.
Chest thumping, beating trumpets. Both candidates for the US presidential election tried to ensure that their voters remain confident before the 5th November vote.
But all I can say is on Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out, and it's going to be party time. It's going to be party time. And this is really all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and I'll fix it, and we'll do it very quickly.
So, Michigan, 2 days to go. You ready? In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it? And we have the momentum because our campaign is tapping into the ambitions, the aspirations, and the dreams of the American people. Because we are optimistic and excited about what we can do together.
Both promised voters of a golden future. While one talked about tax and price cuts, the other promised to end a war.
So with your vote on Tuesday, we're going to fire Kamala, and we are going to save America. We will cut your taxes, end inflation, slash your prices, raise your wages, and bring thousands of factories back to America and back to the good old state of Georgia.
And I want to say, this year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza, and given the civilian casualties and displacement in Lebanon. It is devastating. And as president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza. To bring home the hostages, end the suffering in Gaza, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination.
One thing is for sure, that this was a very colorful election campaign, and both candidates have been neck and neck throughout. Posters are busy predicting the front runner. Atlas Intel's latest poll shows former President Donald Trump leading the predictions, especially in all 7 swing states. About 49% of the respondents said they would vote for Donald Trump in the upcoming presidential election, as the Republicans hold a 1.8% vote lead over his counterpart, Democrat Kamala Harris. The survey conducted on the first 2 days of November included nearly 2,500 likely voters in the US, the majority of which were female. A Reuters Ipsos poll published last week on 29 October showed Kamala Harris lead over Donald Trump, with the Democrat ahead by few percentage points over the Republican, 49% to 46%. The American website 538 of ABC focuses on opinion poll analysis. In their latest release, Harris had a small lead over Trump in the national polling averages, 48% to 47%.
Making Donald Trump one of the biggest losers.
The current Vice President Kamala Harris has led Trump in every Reuters, Ipsos and ABC 538 poll of registered voters since she entered the race in July and built a lead of nearly 4 percentage points towards the end of August. The polls were relatively stable in September and early October, but they have tightened in the last couple of weeks, with her lead steadily shrinking since late September. While national polls are a useful guide as to how popular a candidate is across the whole country, they are not the best way to predict the US presidential election result. Bureau Report, India Today.
Kamala, you're fired. Get out of here.
And probably the most viral story from the American poll battlefield, a social media sensation that has captured American attention and fascination, is Peanut the Squirrel, rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo and a viral star in his own little right, was recently taken by state authorities and euthanized for rabies testing. This has sparked widespread outrage. Peanut's tragic fate has become a focal point in a very heated final lap in the US election. As we pay tribute to little Peanut, watch this story.
A social media sensation, Peanut the Squirrel, has shaken up American politics days before crucial elections. Peanut was rescued by New Yorker Mark Longo and lived with him for 7 years. On Saturday, Longo was raided and Peanut taken away by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Health Department. Peanut was later euthanized to test for rabies.
It not only tears my family apart, but Peanut was the cornerstone of our nonprofit animal rescue. And 10 to 12 DEC officers raided my house as if I was a drug dealer. I was sat outside my house for 5 hours. I had to get a police escort to my bathroom. I wasn't even allowed to feed my rescue horses breakfast or lunch. I was sat there like a criminal.
A raccoon, also in Longo's care, was also taken away and euthanized to test for rabies. The viral squirrel's euthanasia triggered massive outrage online. With number of Trump supporters criticizing the Democrat government, the controversy was amplified by Donald Trump's top backer, Tesla CEO Elon Musk. American state law requires people to get a license if they wish to own a wild animal. Longo says he was working to get Peanut the required certification. Peanut amassed hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok. But at the peak of American elections, its death would be its most viral moment. Bureau Report, India Today.
Meanwhile, India Today's Rohit Sharma, who for months now has been tracking the latest of these political developments, decided to get into a campaign bus at the Capitol Hill. This is what he found out about who are the individuals rooting for, why do they think Trump or Kamala Harris would be the better president.
We're currently in the bus that is taking us to Pennsylvania. Now, we have this exclusive event that we are covering with the Indian American voters, and it is going to be a big event in Pennsylvania. A lot of people are converging there because they know how important Pennsylvania is. 19 electoral college votes from the state of Pennsylvania, and these volunteers and voters believe that that they can actually convince some of those independent voters that will end up deciding who gets to the White House. So throughout the entire day, we'll be traveling in this bus. As you can see, we will be talking to some of the volunteers and voters, asking them their opinion about what they will be doing in their capacity to make sure that they could convince some of these independent voters to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. There will be some door knocking that we will cover, and we will be embedded with this entire volunteer team as they knock doors in Pennsylvania. As you can see right now, this volunteer is helping some of the people get through this app. Now, this is called a van pool app, And what this app does essentially is it allows people to be able to know which houses they have to go and talk to. So some of these voters, it gives them an address, a name of the individual that they will be speaking to. So this volunteer on the bus is helping people download the app that will allow them to campaign.
Absolutely. So basically what I was doing is talking to all the different volunteers and making sure that they have Minivan downloaded on their phone, which Minivan is a platform that allows you to see all of the voters and the person that you're talking to information in a succinct place to allow everything to be there with a script as well to make it easier for the people who are door knocking to make sure it's the most simplest activity that you could be doing to help make sure that we can get out the vote.
Just tell us about, how did this idea of taking South Asians to Pennsylvania come about, and your organization and what you've been doing up till now?
So yes, it is very close. So every vote matters, and as you know, the swing states, how the electoral college works here, the swing states kind of decide who the president is. So I live in Maryland, right? So I vote, but I feel like I have to do work in the swing states, right, mobilize people, because their say is going to determine who is going to be the president for all of us.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us today.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, Congresswoman, you were a Democrat and you ran a presidential campaign in 2020, and now you have endorsed President Trump. What made you change your decision and becoming, endorsing President Trump, and what was the reason for you to do so?
Oh, first of all, I left the Democrat Party a few years ago because today's Democrat Party is controlled and led by this elitist cabal of warmongers who are undermining our freedom, fundamentally censoring free speech, undermining the rule of law and our democratic republic. There are many examples that I could give you. I wrote a book explaining in great detail why I left the Democrat Party. It's called For Love of Country, Leave the Democrat Party Behind. And in this election, the choice was very clear for me in why I endorsed President Trump over Vice President Kamala Harris. It is because of those fundamental rights and freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution and the words that our founders had for us in this country as Americans, our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Under Vice President Harris over these past 4 years, along with Joe Biden, they have undermined our freedom and continue to do so. They have weaponized government entities to go after their political opponents. I've personally experienced political retaliation by this administration, putting me on a domestic terror watch list called Quiet Skies just one day after I did an interview criticizing Kamala Harris's record as vice president and talking to the American people about the dangerous consequences of a Kamala Harris presidency. They have ruined our economy, increased the cost of living. We're seeing increased crime, open borders, over tens of millions of illegal immigrants coming across our borders, many of them actually violent convicted criminals coming from other countries. And on a foreign policy front, they have embroiled us in multiple wars in different parts of the world and have pushed us to the brink of World War III and closer to nuclear war than we ever have been before. On every account, the choice is clear that President Trump in this election is our best hope as a country to get back on that path where we can look to a future of peace and freedom and prosperity for all Americans.
You're supporting Kamala Harris. Why should people vote for Kamala Harris?
I think they should vote. Do you want me to talk in here?
Talk in there, yeah.
I think they should vote for Kamala Harris because she's competent, she's consistent, she is an honorable person, and she's always done her best her whole professional life for the people she served, either in California or the whole nation as a senator and now as vice president. I think she's a great candidate. I think she's a very serious woman who also is warm and cares about the average American, all average Americans. And I think the alternative is atrocious. I think he's been, as a survivor of sexual assault, he has been proven in a court of law to be guilty of that. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. Mm-hmm. And so on behalf of all our little boys and little girls in this country, what message are we sending to them if we're saying that somebody who has been convicted of sexual assault in a court of law is okay to be president of the United States? No. they're not okay. You know, we need an example of somebody who's honorable and has character and a sense of ethics and humanity. And Donald Trump possesses none of those things. And Kamala Harris possesses all of those things, along with a career's decades-long history of public service, you know, working for her citizens. It's just that simple. It's gun control. There's, you know, women's right to choose. There's education. There's so many things. There's healthcare. There's the environment. On all these issues, if we want to protect this country and all of its citizens, there's no other choice than Kamala Harris.
But then, you know, there are people who are still holding their vote. They're not sure why they should vote for Kamala Harris. What would you tell them? Like, you know, the swing state voters, we're in Pennsylvania, independent voters. What would you tell them?
I would say voting for Kamala Harris is voting for a better future for your children or your nieces or nephews or whomever. It's also sending a message that we want a person who is not a liar, at the very least, and is a caring person who's dedicated their life to this country.
Now you're from
That's what I'd say.
You're from Tamil Nadu, so is the vice president.
Yes.
Have you guys ever talked about that at all?
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. You know, I've known her over the years and in different situations. And yeah, we talk about it. We used to talk about food. She loves to cook. And her grandfather lived right around the corner from my grandfather. So I know exactly, you know, where she comes from. And that's very much a part of her. Her Indian roots are really a part of her because she was raised by Indian women,
right.
You know, and you can see it in her mannerisms. You can see it in how she speaks. And it's very basically, voting is a choice in this election between hate and love. If you want to shoot a path, you know, vote for a path for hate and division in our country, there's your answer. If you want to move forward and choose love and empathy and kindness towards all of us that share this land, vote for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, today is on the ground to cover this very important election and all the action that's taking place, for example, in the New York City. India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan sent us what precisely has been happening on the ground, specifically, for example, because amid the election season was also the festive season of Deepavali, and there were many supporters on the ground, specifically Trump supporters. And why would Indian Americans be supporting Donald Trump? Here's how Geeta Mohan found out.
These are the last moments of an election slugfest. Leaders fighting it out to the last breath to ensure they gain control of Washington, D.C. It could impact capitals across the world. Watch India Today for detailed coverage on U.S. presidential elections 2024. Here you have the Indian community events taking place, Diwali celebrations here in Long Island. We spoke to a few leaders over here, community leaders, all of them very enthusiastic about voting, about US elections, and also about Trump. We have to wait and see what happens and how America decides on the 5th of November. But these are visuals of the Indian diaspora coming together to celebrate Diwali here in Long Island. This is Geeta Mohan reporting for India Today Global. भारतीय वोट बैंक कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है इस इलेक्शन में? हर इलेक्शन में इम्पोर्टेंट होता है, लेकिन ज्यादातर डेमोक्रेट्स के लिए इम्पोर्टेंट होता है. तो इस बार कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है भारतीय वोट बैंक?
भारतीय इसलिए बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है, चाहे हम बहुत माइनॉरिटी में हैं, लेकिन हमारे जो रिलीजन है, जैसे अभी विभूति जी ने बताया कि हमारे पास दिवाली की छुट्टी नहीं है, लेकिन कई लोगों ने इलेक्टेड ऑफिशियल्स ने हेल्प किया. तो न्यूयॉर्क सिटी में दिवाली की छुट्टी बच्चों को है स्कूल में. तो लेकिन हम ये चाहते हैं कि जब हम लोग काम कर रहे हैं, हमारी भी होनी चाहिए, लेकिन हम इलेक्टेड ऑफिशियल्स को उनको तभी चुने जो हमारी माइनॉरिटी को ध्यान दे सके, इकोनॉमिकली, हमारे रिलीजियस के लिए और हमारे फ्यूचर, हमारे बच्चों के लिए, एजुकेशन के लिए बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है.
It's the most important race for the White House and really getting close. Opinion polls are showing that it could be a neck-and-neck fight. Democrat nominee Kamala Harris and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Now, according to the opinion polls, the surveys, for example, in Pennsylvania, and let's go one by one. In Pennsylvania, it shows Donald Trump leading, but by just 1%. Predicted to get about 49% of vote share, and Kamala Harris accordingly about 48%. For Georgia, which is going to be one of the big crucial states, is predicting Donald Trump could actually get 50% vote, but Harris will get not the rest 50, but 48. In North Carolina, Harris and Trump are expected to be on the similar line of about 48% votes each. But amid all of this, remember, it's as much about who has been campaigning in the last leg as well. Donald Trump, according to some of the opinion polls, is leading in Arizona, while Harris is better off in Wisconsin. These states are important, remember, because some of these are swing states, which means they may go either way, and that could decide the elections for the United States of America and possibly for global politics as well.
But I've come today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote, this election, most important election you've ever even thought about voting in, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals pouring into our country, and I will bring back the American dream.
We have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is, but Madison, that is not who we are.
Do you like it better now or 4 years ago? Well, I ask it a different. You like it better now or 4 years ago? And I've come today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote on Tuesday, I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of massive numbers of criminals coming into our country. Thank you very much, Kamala and Joe. And I will bring back the American dream, and we'll bring it back stronger than ever before. But this is all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and we will fix it, and we're going to fix it fast.
Just imagine on January 20th. Because if he is elected, if Donald Trump is elected, he's going to be sitting in that Oval Office stewing over his enemies list. Because he spends full time plotting revenge and retribution. So imagine on January 20th, it's either that, him plotting over his enemies list, or me working for you on my to-do list.
Coming in on the sidelines of the upcoming U.S. presidential elections, it is the market that is facing the kind of consequences of it. Remember that there is a lot of uncertainty ahead of any election that takes place, and it's the USA after all. We are told that the Sensex has fallen over 1,300 points. The Sensex crashing 1,300 points, and the market showing that kind of a slide over 1,000 points is important. This also means that the investors are turning cautious, possibly over and ahead of the presidential elections upcoming. Right, so that's a big news coming in, that for now, the latest is that the share market is tumbling. This is early trade, and investors are definitely turning cautious ahead of what happens. Will it be Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, and all that will come in with it? Let's go across to our colleague from Business Today, Shailendra Agarwal, on this. Shailendra, how do you view this? Shailendra Bhatnagar, I correct myself. What do you think is the reason of this crash? What happens? Because what is the connection here of the elections and the market?
Good morning, Pooja. Thank you for having me over. It's fairly simple. It is the US debt market which is troubling not only Indian equities, but equities across the board. And the uncertainty that you have in the US elections, nobody knows who's going to win, which is Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. And that is the reason why you see US 10-year bond yields are spiking. They are at their 5-month highs. And that essentially means from all across the world, money will move back to the US because the dollar is getting stronger. And that's the reason why you see excessive selling that is happening in India, not only in India, but all emerging markets. And you see this fear that is because of the US election now coming to haunt Indian markets. On Dalal Street, even second quarter earnings were terrible. So it is a combination of excessive overvaluation, excessive froth, and now this causation with the US markets as well. Pooja.
Can we expect this to continue, the fluctuation, at least till very clear decision has come about the United States of America's new president?
Yes, so that is one major issue.
Okay.
We need to know who will be the winner, and more importantly, what will that winner do to the US debt. If these yields continue to rise, then I'm afraid all equity markets across the world, including Indian equity markets, will continue to fall, because a strong dollar does not mean anything good for local equities.
Shailendra, also help us understand, for those who may not understand the technicality of these red graphs, what does the red really signify, and till when we are expecting perhaps for it to stabilize in the hours or the days to come for now?
Actually, Pooja, much will depend upon what the eventual winner of the US elections does with the US debt. As I have said, the US 10-year yield has to calm down for equities to start rising. My simple advice is, if you have good quality mutual funds, please do not stop your systematic investment plan. In fact, this would be the best time to buy good quality equity mutual funds, especially on the large cap space. The quality of Indian markets over the next 2 or 3 months will be tested, but we will come out better from this sell-off.
I think eventually your signing off point is the most important. That's the advice to the investors as well, specifically in India. Thank you so much, Shailendra. I'll keep coming back to you over all the updates coming in.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Elections Unlocked US Special. I'm joining you from New York, and we'll be talking about everything that has to do with US elections. In less than 24 hours, America will be voting its new president, the 47th president of the United States of America. While Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are trying to energize their supporters, they present a very different picture of America. Donald Trump is talking about economic revival, while Kamala Harris also focuses on humanitarian efforts. However, when it comes to polls, there is a slight lead that Donald Trump has in the swing states, but Kamala Harris is leading in the national polls. Let's take a look at how the two are faring at the polls.
Chest thumping, beating trumpets. Both candidates for the US presidential election tried to ensure that their voters remain confident before the 5th November vote.
But all I can say is on Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out, and it's going to be party time. It's going to be party time. And this is really all you need to know. Kamala broke it, and I'll fix it, and we'll do it very quickly.
So, Michigan, 2 days to go. You ready? You ready? In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it? And we have the momentum because our campaign is tapping into the ambitions, the aspirations, and the dreams of the American people. Because we are optimistic and excited about what we can do together.
Both promised voters of a golden future. While one talked about tax and price cuts, the other promised to end a war.
So with your vote on Tuesday, we're going to fire Kamala, and we are going to save America. We will cut your taxes, end inflation, slash your prices, raise your wages, and bring thousands of factories back to America and back to the good old state of Georgia.
And I want to say, this year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza, and given the civilian casualties and displacement in Lebanon. It is devastating. And as president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza. To bring home the hostages, end the suffering in Gaza, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination.
One thing is for sure, that this was a very colorful election campaign and both candidates have been neck and neck throughout. Posters are busy predicting the front runner. Atlas Inter's latest poll shows former President Donald Trump leading the predictions, especially in all 7 swing states. About 49% of the respondents said they would vote for Donald Trump in the upcoming presidential election, as the Republicans hold a 1.8% vote lead over his counterpart, Democrat Kamala Harris. The survey conducted on the first 2 days of November included nearly 2,500 likely voters in the US, the majority of which were female. A Reuters Ipsos poll published last week on 29 October showed Kamala Harris lead over Donald Trump, with the Democrat ahead by few percentage points over the Republican, 49% to 46%. The American website 538 of ABC focuses on opinion poll analysis. In their latest release, Harris had a small lead over Trump in the national polling averages, 48% to 47%.
Making Donald Trump one of the biggest losers.
The current Vice President Kamala Harris has led Trump in every Reuters, Ipsos and ABC 538 poll of registered voters since she entered the race in July and built a lead of nearly 4 percentage points towards the end of August. The polls were relatively stable in September and early October, but they have tightened in the last couple of weeks, with her lead steadily shrinking since late September. While national polls are a useful guide as to how popular a candidate is across the whole country, they are not the best way to predict the US presidential election result. Bureau Report, India Today.
Kamala, you're fired. Get out of here.
Polls are not sacrosanct, but they are indicators, and very strong ones at that. In fact, Carnegie Endowment has conducted a poll in which they talk about how significant Indian American voters have become in these elections. There has been a shift from being blue-leaning to the red camp. Rohit Sharma and I bring you this report on how 2.6 million registered Indian American voters are thinking this election.
With a population of approximately 5.2 million, Indian Americans are the second largest immigrant community in the United States, behind only Mexican Americans. And this election, they want to stamp